Okay, got it. So we are being live streamed. Hello. I want to start tonight with a short story. The short story happened about 2,200 years ago, from my calculations, in the time of the great Rabbi Hillel. Now, Rabbi Hillel was famous for his statement that the whole Torah is don't do unto others what you don't like done to yourself. That is his famous statement. I suppose the statement he's most famous for. But there's lots of other things that he's famous for. So as a good introduction to us, to our discussion, I'd like to state one of those things. The Talmud tells us a story that there was one year when they had not bought the Paschal sacrifice, they had not bought the Korban Pesach on a Shabbat. That year, Erev Pesach, we bring the day before Passover, day before Pesach, we bring the Korban Pesach, and they had not brought it on a Shabbat for several years. And some of the rabbis forgot how it is brought. They don't know how to bring it. What's the problem? The problem is that the Paschal sacrifice, the day before Passover, Pesach, it's the busiest day in the temple. And there's not enough shechting knives for that you have in the temple. So people would bring their own knife to shecht with, to slaughter their animal, their lamb. So the question is, how do you get your lamb, or more importantly, how do you get your knife over to the temple on Shabbat? We're not allowed to carry on Shabbat. One of the laws against Shabbat is not allowed to carry in a public domain. So how do they carry it? So the leader of the time was Hillel Hazaken. And somehow they'd never had, the Mishnah was not yet written down. So the oral traditions, laws like this had not yet been compiled. So it was usually done by memory and by teachings. And once in a while, they did not review it, and then people forgot. So that year, the people forgot, and they came to Hillel Hazaken, and he said, this is what we're going to do. He said a famous statement, which is brought down in the Gemara. It says, Poik chazei amad debar. This is an Aramaic term, which means go out and see the nation of the people that are out there. What was he trying to say? And he said, why? And I hope I don't have the Talmud in front of me, because he goes on to say, Ki im loi neviim heim b'nei neviim heim. If they themselves are not prophets, then you should know that they are the sons of prophets. What does this mean? How could that be? What does it mean that the prophets, the sons of prophets, etc.? So the answer to this question is that we'll understand in a moment what happened. So in other words, he says like this. We don't know what to do. We have a halachic dilemma. How do we get our knives for people to be able to slaughter the Paschal sacrifice on Passover, on the day before Passover, when you can't carry? If it's Passover, a chag, we're allowed to carry. If it's a weekday like it normally is, you're allowed to carry. But it's Shabbat, you're not allowed to carry. How are we going to get all those knives over? He doesn't have the answer. So he says, I'll tell you what, don't tell the people what to do. Let's see what the people come up with themselves. In other words, forget that there was even an issue. Let's see what the people come up with. So could you imagine the rabbis, all the senior scholars have forgotten what to do, all the leaders, and they don't know what to do. And Hillel says, you know what, we'll trust the people, that they will do the right thing this time. And what ends up happening is the people, all the people, by themselves, on their own volition, or maybe based on memory, some of them end up taking the knives and tying it before Shabbat or around the horns of the sheep that they were bringing, and therefore the sheep is the one that carried the knife, and the sheep went by itself, and they didn't have to carry the knives. And then when Hillel saw all the people walking with their Paschal sacrifices to the temple this way, Hillel declared, look, now you can see the Jewish people. Yes, sometimes they can act not always in the best way. We're not always the greatest people. But you should know, he says, yes, now it's come back to me. God made me forget. And there's a whole reason why the Talmud brings over there. He had done something that was not becoming of him. He'd been a little bit too stringent on something, or too slightly egotistic. And therefore, he was the humblest of men. But as a result, he forgot this law. But really, he understood that he forgot this law to teach us that people have some element of prophecy. Just bear with me. I'm going to just change my chair. 1 second. My chair's getting a bit uncomfortable. Sorry. Apologies for that. I thought I would try a different chair because the other chair doesn't turn, and then I don't end up turning things while I'm talking to you, but it gets a bit uncomfortable, that one. Sorry about that. So why am I telling you this story? Because this concept actually forms a very strong foundation in Judaism. It formulates a big chunk of Jewish tradition known as minhagim, customs. Customs is traditions, rituals that have been made up by the people. Now, the question that we're going to have is, do these traditions and laws hold any weight? Or they have any value to them? That's the question. So I should have started with that question, but I started with the story. Once we've heard that story, we now know that they do hold weight and they are considered to be extremely important. So let me share with you my screen if you don't mind. Whoops, wrong screen. Apologies. No, why is it doing it again? Sorry. Apologies. I'm struggling to share the right screen. I'll try this one more time. That's also the wrong screen. 1 second. This time I'll get it right, because I've done something different. There you go. Now you can see my screen. Okay, can you see the picture, and only the picture of the man putting the finger on the ring of the woman? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what do we see? There's a statement over here. It says, the customs of our ancestors is Torah. What this means is, it's a famous quote that we bring several times in the Talmud, and it says that there's several elements to the Torah. The one element to the Torah is the written Torah, what God gave us on Mount Sinai. God said, do this. God said, do that. Then we explained another part, which is, I'll go over all the parts in a moment. But what does it mean? It means as follows: orderly people behaving in a particular way with an intention of enhancing their relationship with Hashem is considered to be part of the Torah as something special and holy. How does this work? So, in order to understand that, I'll bring to you, I wanted to read to you, if you don't mind, a interesting text. This text talks about a particular community that is from Talmud, the Talmud in the Tractate Psachim, page 50. I can't share two screens at once, it gets a bit difficult. And it says as follows. It says, B'nai Baishanov Duloi have ozlin mitzud letzidon b'mal Shabbat. I'll read it in English to make it simpler. It says the citizen of Baishan. Baishan was a Babylonian city. And they would have the custom that they wouldn't go from Tyre to Sidon on Friday. They wouldn't travel between these two cities. Their children went to Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, for our ancestors, this was possible. For us, this is impossible. The times have changed. We want to annul this custom. We want to stop doing this custom. So what do you think Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked us then? Rabbi Yochanan said, I believe it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, your fathers have already taken this stringency upon themselves, and therefore you should not change it. And he brings a pasuk from King Solomon. King Solomon in Mishlei in Proverbs, he says the following line. He says, Shema b'ni musar avicha v'al titosh mitorat imecha. There's a song, a beautiful song, Mordechai ben David made out of this, but let me at least tell you what it means. It says, hear my child, to the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the teaching of your mother. So he says like this, what are the two implications of two different types of instructions? There's instructions that come from your father and instructions that come from your mother. So he says the instruction that comes from your father, we understand that your father may have gone to study by some scholar, spent some years, as was the tradition. Fathers would leave their homes and go and study and learn from teachers. And they would get instruction in Torah law, and that's how the oral tradition passed on. So telling us, do not go against the oral traditions of your father, the oral Torah, and do not stray from the, forsake the teachings of your mother, says that is teachings that they never got from some teacher, but that was customs that they got from their mothers and passed down from generation to generation. So we have over here, it says from all the way back to King Solomon, tells us Rabbi Yochanan, we have a source in the Tanakh, in the Bible, for the concept of customs. There's several other customs, there's several other sources, but this is one of the most famous. I want to pause for a moment and just ask if anybody has any questions on the answer.
It's not very clear who have to be superseded who.
What
it's
do you
not
mean?
Very clear. I mean, should it be mother or father? Just that's and that to me it's not very clear.
Okay. Let me clarify that. Thank you for the question. So the question is that what we're saying is that none of that. It's an interesting point, by the way, very interesting point. Who supersedes which? And we have a whole discussion. But for simple put, we say the instruction of your father, that's the oral teachings of the scholars, of the rabbis passed down from Moses, that you have to keep. And the teachings of your mother, that's the customs that were not necessarily passed down from Moses, but they were made up by people. And that you also have to keep. Now, you're asking a question, what happens if the two contradict each other? What happens?
Yes.
What happens if the custom contradicts with the halacha? It's a fascinating question. Okay, I was going to get into it later, but I'll get into it now because you asked the question. Because you're right, I didn't think about it, that the question actually comes up already in this verse. So, in general, we say that halacha would overcome a custom. But there are certain customs that we consider to be so ingrained within the Jewish people that they will overcome Jewish law, not only just rabbinical law, but sometimes even biblical law. Let me give you an example of this. I'll give you an example. It's not exactly a custom, but it's because of the custom. So we say there's a Torah, the statement on the screen that I shared, it says that it's like Torah. The customs are like Torah. So there's different types of customs. Sometimes customs are through the rabbis. The rabbis make a law, or they start something and they teach it to the people. So that's like a little bit of a mixture between a rabbinic law and a custom. Then there's other customs that are made by people, by the simple people of a particular community. Okay? Now, certain customs get the level of Torah, and sometimes they will override the biblical custom. So one example of this is that here in the diaspora, we live outside of Israel, right? Outside of Israel, we celebrate for most of the festivals, except for Yom Kippur, 2 days of Yom Tov, of Chag, of festival, that we don't drive. So we have 2 Seders. In Israel, Israelis struggle with this. You know, they say, what do you mean? There's only one Seder. Because in Israel, there's only one Seder night. But we know that there's 2 Seder nights out of here, out of Israel. Also, the last days of Pesach in Israel, there's only 1 day, and we have 2 days. The only place where it's different is Rosh Hashanah, where they also have 2 days for a separate discussion. Now, let me ask you a question. The Torah tells us to put on tefillin. As Jewish males, we have to put on tefillin every weekday, except for Shabbat and Yom Tov. So how could it be that we don't put on, we keep a second day of Yom Tov, the last day of Pesach, for example? According to the Torah, the festival is over. That day in Israel, they'll be putting on tefillin, fulfilling the biblical commandment that it says in the Shema to put on tefillin. And we over here in the diaspora won't put on tefillin. How is that possible? That's the question. And the answer is...
Rabbi, can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question is, how come the last day of Passover, for example, and it applies to all the festivals, but I'm just going to give a simple example, one simple example. The last day of Passover, we over here outside of Israel, men don't put on tefillin. But in Israel, they do put on tefillin. Because by us, it's not considered a festival, and by them it is. Sorry, by us it is a festival, by them it isn't. Thank you. So how could that be? How could the Torah, how could we in the diaspora go against what it says in the Torah? That's my question. So the answer to this question is this: that we have a tradition that once a custom has become accepted amongst the people, whether it was instituted by the people and agreed upon by the majority, or it was instituted by the rabbis and agreed upon by the majority, that stays the way we do it. Now, being that in temple times, the way they celebrated the festivals, they understood that outside of Israel, the only way they can celebrate the festivals is as 2-day festivals, because you didn't always know when the new month started, because you had to have witnesses that saw the birth of the new moon, etc. So therefore, we had to have 2-day festivals, and that's the way it was, and we understood that to be biblically okay, or the right way to do it according to the Torah. We always celebrated 2 days. So therefore, afterwards, when we instituted a fixed calendar, and we didn't have to wait for messengers and witnesses to come to tell us about the new moon in Israel, we still kept that way. Why? Because once it became a custom that all Jews in the diaspora outside of Israel celebrate 2 days and they don't put on tefillin, it's now become it's almost like the power of the Torah, and the custom in such a case will override the biblical commandment. So Sam's question is, which will supersede which? Generally, we would say that in most cases, the biblical commandment will supersede the Torah commandment. In 90% of cases. But when the custom has become so established and it had such a strong basis and fully accepted, there are times like this example that I've given you where we say minag mevatel halacha, minag nullifies the halacha, or sometimes we're going to say custom becomes halacha, so it's no longer a custom anymore. It's got the definition of halacha, even though it's not. Halacha generally means it's a rule. It's a law that was passed down, whether it was by the oral Torah or by the rabbis instituted, as we explained. Sometimes the custom will become the same weight as a regular law. So I've jumped the gun over here before really getting into customs, but because of the question, I wanted to get into that. But we'll get back into all this later on, and hopefully it will be clearer to you. Okay? So let me just go step back a bit, just to revise us with everything. So, reminding. So, what's these questions? What's a custom? A custom is something which becomes accepted by most of the Jews, and then it becomes part of the Torah. For example, let me give you an example. We've got Pesach coming soon. We know that there's major differences between Jews when it comes to Passover, Pesach. The customs vary very into the extreme. Could anybody think of one particular custom that sticks out as a major difference between different Jews?
Definition of chametz between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim.
Good. What's the difference between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim?
Define chametz differently, like we keep niyot.
We don't define. Oh, very good.
Eating rice.
Sorry, Esther,
I
you
said eating rice.
Eating rice. That's the same. That's right. Okay, good. So let me give you. This is a great example. I sometimes do give a whole share just on this topic, but it's a really good example of a famous difference that we see within this. This is a well-known difference. You know what? Before I get into this example, I'm going to jump a slide just to make things a bit more clear. Okay? So just bear with me. I'm going to get back to that kidney thing. Just bear with me a moment. So what I wanted to show you this. This is our fourth class that we're discussing these ideas. Our first class, we described the first part of the oral Torah, which is the received. Basically, the vowels, how to read the Torah, where to put the places, the explanations, the basic explanation to each commandment that Moses was given on Mount Sinai. The second class, we discussed what happens if those laws are not described. How do we figure out the law? What's the law when it wasn't given part of the basic explanation? And we answered, it becomes derived. It's derived. We have laws that are derived from the Torah, and we have different principles of how we derive them. We'll get into this. We're going to continue this discussion in more detail in some of the other weeks and go into some examples of this in a fun way, hopefully. The third example that we discussed last week was new laws, which are not from the Torah, like Hanukkah, like Purim, like reading the Megillah, washing hands, etc., that are not from the Torah, but the rabbis legislated them. They're considered law, but they're considered rabbinic law. Then today, we now come to the fourth category, and this is all part of the oral tradition, all part of Torah is customs. And these could be even initiated by regular people, but they have to become established, and they have their processes. I'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so these are the four categories. So let's get back into what I was discussing before. So let's give the major example that we have coming up with Passover, with Pesach, is the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. Ashkenazim are Jews that generally come from Eastern Europe, or mainly from different parts of Europe, except for Spain. and the countries around Spain. And Sephardim were Jews that came usually from Spain, Morocco, and parts of Africa, sometimes other parts of the world as well. But generally, majority of Ashkenazim come from most of Europe, and Sephardim come from most of Africa and Spain. Okay, Sfarad means Spain, Ashkenaz means Germany, and that's generally we are divided into these two categories. We will see that within Judaism, we know that there are much, much, much more categories, but this is the biggest, so to speak, split. So how did these customs form? We know that, for example, Sephardim are allowed to eat rice on Pesach. Ashkenazim, we don't eat rice on Pesach. Now, Noach said a point which I want to talk about, which is really important for this discussion. Noach said that we have a different definition of chametz. Do we have a different definition of chametz? And the answer to that would be no. So, because look at this, and I'm doing this while I'm showing you the slide, because we all agree on the first three categories. There's no difference between the three categories. Received, derived, and legislated is 90% or probably 99% fully agreed. There sometimes could be a slight difference in which ones we derive, but almost always this three part is exactly the same. There'll be a debate in the Talmud. In received, there's no debate in the Talmud. We'll talk about that in future discussions. In derived, there is a debate, but we come to an accepted conclusion usually, although sometimes the conclusions could be slightly different between Sephardim and Ashkenazim and Hasidim, etc. And in legislated, once again, there's usually very little difference. Okay? However, when it comes to customs, this is where you see all the difference. This is where the different colors of the Jewish people come out, so to speak. This is where everybody has their own thing. So, do we have the same definition for chametz? Of what is chametz? Sephardim and Ashkenazim? Yes. So how could it be that Sephardim are allowed to eat rice and we can't? Everybody agrees that rice is not chametz. There's no argument whether rice or peas or lentils are chametz. Nevertheless, there was certain, particularly in rice, but in certain of all kitniot, all these legumes, there was certain comparisons to the way scientifically, or not even scientifically, but the way you can almost make a flour that's similar to regular flour. These similarities led, and that's one thing. First of all, they were very similar. Also, in Ashkenazi countries, rice fields and wheat fields often were next to each other, and sometimes they got mixed with one with the other. So if you went to buy a packet of rice, you could have a few kernels of wheat sneak in there sometimes. And one kernel of wheat on Passover, even in 10,000 or 1,000,000 kernels of rice, makes the whole thing not kosher for Pesach. If it was just regular non-kosher, the rest of the year it would have been fine. If it was one little tiny piece of something non-kosher. But for Passover, it's not good enough. So the Ashkenazic authorities therefore said that because we have these two issues, we have issue number one. I'm doing this short, as I said, we could do this a whole lesson another time. The Ashkenazic authorities said because we have these issues, therefore we've decided that we're not going to eat rice, and we're not eat legumes because they puff up slightly the same way and they rise slightly the same way, similar to the way dough rises. Because just to clarify, getting a little bit caught up in this example, according to all opinions, there's only 5 grains that make chametz: barley, wheat, rye, spelt, and oats. If it's not one of those 5, it cannot make chametz. Nobody argues with that. Is that clear? So they only argue about whether or not you should make. So in Ashkenazi countries, they said no rice on Pesach, no legumes, no kitniot. Sephardic custom was that you can, but Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he said they have to check it numerous times. Half Sephardim don't even do that. But nevertheless, he said you have to do it, and it becomes a whole hassle. And that's why Sephardim are allowed to do it, but we don't. They said that in Sephardic countries, wheat and rice never grew next to each other, so you didn't have to worry about that. Okay? So there you have a great example of different customs. But we have lots of other customs. If you go to, for example, shuls, that you'll see that the style of davening, the main concept of davening, the Shema and the blessings are all the same, more or less the same. But you'll see slight variations in some of the wording. That once again, that is the main core of the prayer, was established in the Second Temple era by the men of the Great Assembly. The men of the Great Assembly were people like Ezra, who built the second, Daniel, Mordechai, that whole group. They established most of the prayers, or the core of the prayers. But the surrounding of the prayers and the details of the prayers, that was sometimes added and changed from the places of the local rabbis and things like that. So what I think it's really important to understand is that we're not like Christians, where in Christianity you have 50,000 different groups, and each one has literally a different religion, and just have one similarity, but that they hold JC in high esteem. Some consider him the Messiah, the other one says he's God, the other one says this. They're all different, very different sometimes. In Judaism, our Torah is exactly the same no matter where you come from. Our customs may differ. A lot of our customs will be the same. So if you take any Jewish festival, you'll see, for example, we dip the apple in honey on Rosh Hashanah night. All Jews do that. We have Ashkenazim usually had a head of a fish, but nevertheless, Sephardim usually had the head of a ram, although even in Ashkenazi countries, they had the head of a ram as well on their tables. On Rosh Hashanah. Now, I want to tell you this whole thing about minhagim. There's different categories of minhagim, of customs. They fall into different categories. So the most common type of custom is a custom called minhag hamakom, the custom of the place. Okay, and that is that if you go to a particular shul, for example, and they have a tradition, and in this shul they daven with this type of siddur, then that's their custom, and that's what you should follow. There's the customs of the place. In this shul, they do things in this particular way, then you have to follow those customs. That's the law. So, as I mentioned earlier, once the custom has become established, we're not allowed to change it. So we take it very seriously. There's a story of the Ramah. Now, who was the Ramah? The Ramah was a famous. So talking about Sephardim and Ashkenazim and customs, the Code of Jewish Law was written originally by Rabbi Yosef Karo in the 1600s. He was a Sephardic rabbi that was the head of the community in Tzfas. Now, Rabbi Yosef, he lived originally in Cairo, and then he moved to Tzfas, and he wrote a Code of Jewish Law simplifying all the Jewish laws. And one of the great halachic rabbis at the time in Krakow, in the Ashkenazic world, was a man by the name of Reb Moshe Isserles. I happened to have been at the burial places of these two people. I've been both to Krakow and to Reb Yosef Karo in Tzfas. Is the shul Reb Moshe Isserles? We still have a shul in Krakow from all those years ago. Krakow was one of the few cities that the Nazis didn't destroy in Poland, Jewish cities. Anyway, so the Ramah's shul, he wrote a book that was also codifying Jewish law based on Ashkenazi custom, adding Ashkenazi custom. But just when he was writing it, just at that time, he got a manuscript of this new book that had just been published, just been written by his colleague in Israel, the Rabbi Yosef Karo. And he sees this book and he says, well, this is exactly what I've been working on. There's no point in having two of the same books. You're going to have two codes of Jewish law. He beat me to it. I'm not going to make another one. Instead, what I'll do is, the only difference is I agree with a lot of what he's saying, but his is more Sephardic dominated. So what I'll do is I'll take his book and I'll add notes for when the law changes, when the custom or changes for Ashkenazim. So when you look at a regular Shulchan Aruch today that you buy, you see the bold print. That's the original print of Rabbi Yosef Karo from Tzfat. And then you have like a different script, and that's known as the Haggah, the footnotes or the notes, and that's Reb Moshe Isserles from Krakow. Incredible thing that even then trying to articulate. Anyway, Reb Moshe Isserles from Krakow, he once came to a town, and in this town that he became the rabbi of a town. I don't think it was Krakow. I think it was another town before Krakow, but I may be mistaken. He saw a very strange custom. We know that traditionally Jewish women, after having their period, they're supposed to go spend a week of cleanliness, or as in no bleeding, and afterwards they go immerse themselves in a mikveh before they're able to be intimate with their husbands again. Now, Jewish law generally is that this concept is kept very private. We don't publicize it. We don't tell anybody about it. It's kept. The only people that generally know about it is the woman, her husband, and the lady in the mikveh, the lady that's in charge of running the mikveh. And this way, women that are going through the regular cycles go once a month to mikveh, and that's the way it's done. Now, in this particular town, they had a very strange custom, which was the day after. So every morning, the gabbai of their shul would stand up after davening, and he would make an announcement, and he would say, I would like to wish Mazel Tov to the Heller family, and this family, and that family, and that family for going to the mikveh yesterday. So he would make an announcement who was in the mikveh last night. His wife was the mikveh lady. And he would come with a list to say which people were in mikveh yesterday. It's totally antithetical to what the rest of Jewry was doing. So the Ramah, there's this great rabbi, he comes to the town and he says, this is unacceptable. This is embarrassing. It's not meant to be public knowledge. We specifically try to keep it a secret. So bring the great rabbi that he was, he annuls this custom. And he stops the custom. And later on, he finds it from the people in the town and the gabbai, they find out that the amount of people using the mikveh has declined. Women were still leaving, but women, for whatever, maybe the mikveh was extremely cold and not pleasant. So some women would tell their husbands that they were going, and then they never actually went. Or some husbands never even bothered sending their wives to the mikveh, whatever it is, and never end up a bit before, because suddenly there wasn't this communal thing of having to be part of the group that you actually went to mikveh. People stopped going to mikveh, and mikveh is considered the bedrock of the Jewish people. It's considered the primary, most important. If you look at the most important laws, going to mikveh is considered right up there. The woman's mikveh. Family purity law. It's considered really important. And here he sees, the Ramah finds out that through him annulling that custom, there's been a decline in mikveh going. So he says, it's true that it's not modest to making these public announcements about people going to mikveh, But more important is that the biblical law, the extremely important biblical law of people going to mikveh, occurs. And therefore he says, I don't think he re-established this custom, but he re-strengthened the mitzvah. But he said, from here you learn, and I've learned how careful you have to be about annulling a custom. So why did he annul it? Here's this great rabbi. How does he have the right to annul it? That's one question. And the answer is because it was a minhag shtus. It was a foolish custom. So we're told that foolish customs generally don't stand. Or it's a minhag tos. It's a minhag that was established, and it was established because people didn't know better. So we're told those type of customs should fall away. But you have to be very careful when you know that type of custom. They say another story. I'll just tell you two cute stories about this that we know. There was once a story of a particular rabbi that was visiting he was visiting one of these far-flung communities, and he went there to be a guest rabbi over Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur the one year. And when he gets there, Yom Kippur, nobody eats and drinks. It says after davening, the whole community walks by themselves. They walk to the outskirts of the town, and people take out some bread and start eating in the middle of Yom Kippur. And he's like, what's going on? Like, I thought these were religious Jews, and suddenly in the middle of Yom Kippur, they walk to the edge of town and they all start eating. What happened? He followed them, he sees what they're doing. And then he finds out, sorry, I messed up the story. Oh, I forgot the details of the story. I think I changed the story. The story was that they were putting on tefillin on the outskirts of the town on the second day of Yom Tov. That's what had happened. Sorry, my mistake. I think that was the story. They had gone to the outskirts of the town. It was like the last day of Pesach or something, and the last day of time. No. Yeah. Or they were eating chametz. Okay, sorry, I'm getting confused. Either they were putting on tefillin or they were eating chametz the last day of Pesach. And he asked them what's going on. And they said, well, this is what we've been doing the last few years. Why? Because once there was a rabbi that came in, he did this. And he found out what had happened. And a rabbi had come past and was visiting from Israel. And that rabbi that was visiting from Israel was celebrating one day less of Pesach. So after Pesach, the law is that if you're from Israel and you're not celebrating that extra day, you're allowed to eat chametz the day after Pesach, but you have to do it in private. And you're supposed to put in tefillin, but you put it in private. So these people went to the outskirts of the town, to where this rabbi had gone, away from the people, away from his host. And over there, he had put on tefillin and eaten chametz. And some person had snuck up on him, seen what he was doing. And now they thought that there was some type of hidden Kabbalistic thing that if you go to the outskirts of the town, you can do it. So that's what we call a minhag shtus. That type of custom doesn't stay. Or there's another custom famous of a story of a shul that every time people would walk in, they would bend backwards. And they found out afterwards that there used to be a beam coming down the entrance. So people had to duck to get in. But then they changed the building, or they made a new entrance, and people didn't have to duck to get in anymore. So they didn't have to bow entrance. But people thought that that's the way you did it because they were doing it for so long. That's once again a minhag shtus. There was no backing, no reason behind it. But here's the thing. Another type of custom. So I spoke about two types or three types of customs. It's called a mistaken custom, or sometimes it's a ta'ut, it's a mistake. Then there's another type of custom which I spoke about, which is a custom which is from a community. Community establishes certain things. Sometimes the community will establish, as I mentioned at the beginning, that they don't travel from this city to another city. Here, a famous example of a custom established in a place is in Jerusalem. Till this day, in Jerusalem, they accept Shabbos. Their candlelighting is 30 minutes before sunset, Shkia. And they have alarms that go off. 30 minutes. We, the rest of the world, only accept Shabbos 18 minutes before sunset. They have 30 minutes. That's a unique custom to Jerusalem. But there was other towns, for example. What happens if your entire town has a custom that they accept Shabbos 1 hour before Shabbos comes in? If the whole town has accepted it, you're not allowed to go against it. But if, like in Melbourne, where some people accept Shabbos early, some people accept Shabbos on town. If you go to Caulfield, you'll see some people an hour before Shabbos, they're already in their suit and ties, and they're walking back from shul, already davened. And then you have other people that are still driving around, running with their towels to the mikveh, or who knows what they're doing, still driving. And how could it be? So it says, if it was one town and the whole entire town had accepted that law, then we wouldn't be able to change it, and everybody would have to follow that same law. But being that we have different customs within our town, by the way, this is something which is true today, today's world, where we have people from all different communities living within one community. Like Melbourne, we have Chabad, and we have Breslov, and we have Litvish, and Hasidic, and Polish, and all different styles, Mizrahi, modern Orthodox, and every community has their own customs. So today, we're a lot weaker when it comes to customs of a place. But in old days, if you went to a German town, everybody in that town followed the same custom. It never changed. Okay, there's so much we can talk about customs. Custom is a full-on category because half of Jewry is actually custom. I'm just going to quickly check one more thing. So there's a few more customs that I wanted to just mention to you before we go on to something more esoteric, something more deep and mystic in this whole thing. Is there something called the Kabbalistic custom? In Hasidic communities and also in some Sephardic communities, a lot of our customs are actually Kabbalistic. Now, the thing about Kabbalistic customs is that they're often for some spiritual thing written in a book, like a book of the Zohar or a book of the Arizal, that the Arizal used to have this custom. And sometimes the reason is given and sometimes it's not. And we as Hasidim, we follow a lot of those types of customs. So when a custom is Kabbalistic, we are very cautious not to stop those customs. Why? Because sometimes they have very deep spiritual meaning. That's the meaning of Kabbalistic. There's a spiritual meaning behind it that we can't necessarily explain in physical terms. And therefore, just because I can't explain it, doesn't mean that I should nullify it. And we're very careful not to nullify it. But at the same time, we don't impose Kabbalistic customs on everybody. Okay? Because when it comes to a custom which is written in the book and everybody's accepted it, that's the way it goes. That becomes a Jewish custom. But if it's a Kabbalistic custom, people that accept it keep it, and people that don't accept it don't. It's that simple. We don't force, so to speak, people. It doesn't become part of mainstream Jewry.
Can I give us example of Kabbalistic custom?
An example of a Kabbalistic custom. Okay. There's so many, but just, Noach, do you want to say something?
Is tzitzit one of them? The way you tie it, the different.
Yes. Good example. So, for example, I can't show you right now. The way, I don't know if you'll, no, I'm not going to be able to do it. It's not going to work. There's different ways of how we tie the tzitzit. So the core of how we tie it is the same for all Jews. But then Chabad and also other Hasidic groups, we add a little twirl in between each twirl. And that's something Kabbalistic. I don't know the reason for it. It's the way we divide the twirls. Okay? Once again, that's a Kabbalistic custom. Another example of a Kabbalistic custom is, for example, this is something we do know, that traditionally men's clothing is left over right. We will put our clothing, Hasidim in particular, and the Rebbe was very particular about this, that our jackets and our kapotas, our long coats that we wear on Shabbos, will always put right over left. Now, there's no law about that. It's just because Kabbalah, so that we actually know the law. We always know the reason Kabbalistically. We don't always understand it. The reason for that is because Kabbalistically, we always want right represents kindness and left represents stringency. And we always want right to overcome stringency. There's a famous clip that I saw recently where a Hasidic man, non-Chabad Hasidic man, came past the Rebbe for dollars on a Sunday. And I didn't see if there was discussion about it at all, but the Rebbe tells him, if you change away your jacket and you tie your jacket right over left, it will bring you better livelihood. It will improve your livelihood. It's just interesting because we believe that another Kabbalistic custom, I think this is Kabbalistic, that when you see Hasidic people, you'll see whenever we make Kiddush, it's a big mess because we always make our cup overflow. Is it Kabbalistic or just Hasidic craziness? I'm not exactly sure. I understand it's something Kabbalistic. We make the cup overflow. Most people just fill up the cup like normal people. Hasidim, we always make sure that it's overflowed. Why? Because the wine represents the blessing, and we want to make sure it's overflowing with blessing. Okay? There's thousands of such customs. Some have become accepted in all of mainstream Judaism. Some are just Hasidic, some are Sephardic, but generally, there's lots of those type of customs that we have. Sometimes these customs will also change the way mainstream halacha is. For example, we Chabad, halachically, you're supposed to eat 3 meals on Shabbat, wash 3 times for bread. We, as Chabad Hasidim, we have a learning that we have a halachic source for it. We have to have a halachic source for it. We only wash twice on Shabbat, Friday night, and Shabbat day once. We don't do the late Shabbos afternoon washing again. And we have it's Kabbalistically why we don't do that. But there's also a very clear indication from the Torah of why we don't do that. But halachically, it's pretty clear that most authorities hold that you should be doing three washings. Okay, that's eating a washing for bread on Saturday night is another Kabbalistic custom. There's thousands, half of it. I'll show you in a moment how many customs we have in Judaism and what percentage of Judaism actually falls into this category, this last category. It's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, of the 4 categories. So I wanted to, before I go into that, any other questions? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Whether the chumrah, is that a custom or stringency, different stringency, is that a custom or halacha?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think just off the top of my head, I would think that a chumrah is a custom that has been established, but not by all people. So for example, I'll give you an example. Let's talk about Pesach, for example. Pesach, Chabad, we have the custom. So, for example, Ashkenazim not to eat kitniot is not a stringency. That's a full-on custom. It's almost like a law. We don't do that. But then when it comes to, for example, peeling fruit, we peel all our fruit and vegetables on Pesach. But that's not halacha, that's a stringency custom. Okay? So that's a stringency, but it's also a custom. So most stringencies are usually customs. And that's the way Hasidim. The reason why we got the term Hasidim, because Hasidim is a term that didn't start with the Hasidim 250 years ago. It's a term that goes all the way back in the Talmud, and it means those which are very pious in their or today you would call it ultra-Orthodox, people that are very stringent in their observance of mitzvahs, were called Hasidim. So who gave the Hasidim this term? The opposers of the Hasidim, making fun. Oh, they're always so strict. They're always so strict. They're like the Hasidim. They're Anshe Ma'aseh. It says Hasidim and Anshe Ma'aseh. These they adopt all these stringent customs for themselves. So generally stringency falls into the category of custom. Now, on that point, just one more point about that. We're not allowed to just, if we become stringent in something, you got to be careful to stop. Like, for example, if I start peeling my fruit and vegetables on Passover, on Pesach, it's a question whether I'm allowed to stop. And then what happens if 1 year I can't do that anymore? And you have to think, if I've done it over and over again and I've personally accepted upon myself, then I can't stop it. But if I was just doing it because that's the way my father did it, and that was the custom in his house, but I never necessarily accepted because it's just a stringency custom, I don't necessarily have to accept that. But if it's a custom of my tradition, Chabad custom is I wear a kapata, for example, I wear a long jacket, I wear a gartel, that it's not a stringency, that is my Hasidic custom garb, and that I shouldn't stop. Okay? Okay, we could talk about this for a long time, but I wanted to, two more things that I wanted to do that in this discussion of customs. Number one, I wanted to show you how this this works in an incredible format. When you look at the puzzle of, one second. When we look at the format of how Judaism is formulated, so if you look at the first category, for example, received, you'll see that it's much more God involved than human involved. And as we go down the line, derived it's in the Torah, but we have to find out from the Torah. Legislated, it's from the rabbis that make the law. And then the fourth one, it's totally coming from the people, from the rabbis or from just regular people. So as we go down the line from received, derived, legislated, and customary, it's less and less commanded and more either self-discovered or self-accepted from ourselves. So when if we were to look at this on some type of scale and compare, we have the written Torah, and you have the written. It's very heavily, very heavily Hashem, godly imposed. It's all from Hashem. No human intervention over there. When you look at the received part, that's also mainly from God, but it requires human beings to keep on giving their tradition down to their children, but it's basically just passing over information. So it's still heavily divine and less human. When you go down to derived, it's about equal, but slightly more towards the human because it's all in the Torah, but we have to suck it out of the Torah. We have to find it within the Torah. So it's going more human orientated. When we come to legislated, it's also, once again, leaning more towards the human, but we understood that it's still God's will, which is guiding the rabbis to make these laws of Hanukkah, Purim, etc. And then when we come to customary, it's almost fully human imposed, it's much heavily human. But once again, we would say, why are customs still important? Because even though they're somewhat human-made, but we understand that we have, as I started the class, that we have some type of prophecy that makes us do the things in that way. We don't believe that we just act. We believe that we have a godly soul, which is pushing in us in that direction to do the things in that particular way. Okay. Now, why is this important? The Rebbe has a beautiful discussion about this, and he makes this analyzation that I've just showed you, how you see the change of human scale. And he says something pretty interesting. He says when it comes to relationships, ultimately Judaism And the Torah is all about building a relationship with God. And if you were to take that as an analogy for a human relationship with a man and a wife, so you have different types of way that people express themselves and live in their relationships. Somehow, some people, they have a good relationship between their husband and wife. It's a good relationship. Whatever the wife asks the husband to do, or the husband asks the wife to do, they do what each other wants them to do. But they have to ask. That's most people that have a good relationship would fall into that category. But some of the time, or some people all the time, they don't have to ask. They just can say it. They could just hint to it. They could hint to, they could hint something, and the spouse knows them well enough that they're able to figure out what the other one wants. But that's not all people, but that's a greater love. They're more in tune with their spouse. And then the highest sense of love is, and if you're missing any of this, don't think that there's anything lacking in your relationship. I'm sure you have elements of this that you already are inclined. Okay? And the highest sense of love is when you don't even need to be hinted to, you could just sense what it is that the other one wants. So he says, when you look at the first stage, it's like the received and the written Torah, that's clearly fulfilling what God had commanded us. So we have a good relationship with God, but we'll do only what God tells us to do. It's like some type of groups, or we call them, modern Orthodox tries to follow that thing. We'll do what has to be done, but we'll follow only the letter of the law. We won't go above and beyond. We won't try to be extra stringent. So that's expressing the full. But then when you look at the derived, that's more like we fulfill God's will, but we don't have to wait for God to clearly tell us what to do. We'll derive it from the hints that God leaves to us in the Torah. And then sensing what others desire, or what the other desires, that's an example of the legislated and the customs where we ourselves kind of are in tune with the will of Hashem and what God would really want. And through that, we come up with what it is that God really wants, just like an understanding of our spouse, just by sensing what they want, not having to actually. So this is the different types of relationship. So ultimately, what we get out from this is custom seems to be the most distance from Hashem. But the truth is that the custom is actually the greatest and deepest expression of the Jews' relationship with Hashem. It's an expression of the deeper love that we have, that we're trying to add in our connection, and not just suffice with the bare minimum, just to, so to speak, appease the other one. We want to make way to connect to Hashem in our own fashion. That's the most beautiful way to connect to Hashem. So the customs end up holding, and that's why, by the way, in the Hasidism, we consider customs to be so the most important. When we ask the Manish Tana, famously, Chabad has a different order for the Manish Tana on the Seder night. Why? We actually start with the custom. Why? For this very reason, because we want to show that customs are sometimes the greatest expression of our love to Hashem. We don't start with Motzi Matzah like everybody else's, which is a clear Torah obligation. We will start first from the dipping, I think it is, because that's the custom. Okay, so that's the end of our formal discussion, but we've got a little bit of a game just to conclude, which is basically trying to figure out if we went through the Pesach Seder, which part of the Torah it comes from. So you'll understand what it means. If you look at the Seder plate, where does it come from? Does it come from the received, derived, legislated, or customary? Who wants to figure that one out? You can unmute yourself and say if you want. Where do you want to say?
Go your comment.
What do you can guess.
I'm guessing customary.
What do you want to say?
I was going to say the Seder plate comes from more customary.
You're correct. Customary. Good. Okay. The four cups of wine, where does that come from? This is a little bit of a tricky one because it can kind of come from two of them. It could come from three of them, but
Customary and derived, but also legislative.
yeah, you're correct. It's kind of from derived because we learn it out from the four expressions of redemption. That's what it's signified by, but ultimately it's not a clearly derived, it's a legislated law that the rabbi said that we should do. It's not considered a biblical law. So it's not really part of derived, it's more considered part of legislative, but you are correct, there is a derived element to it. Reclining on Pesach. This is considered an absolute obligation, like eating on things. What else? Where do you think this one is from? Also a little bit of a complicated one.
I just say I think it might be legislative and customary.
Legislated and customary. You are correct. It's legislated. This is something that the rabbis legislated that we have to lead on Pesach. The next thing is vegetables dipped in salt water. Where does this come from?
Customary.
What do you want to say? I can't hear you.
I think it's customary.
Customary. I would have thought that too, but it's actually a legislative law from the rabbis. Okay.
You could say anything in the Seder is legislated, because somebody had to make up the order of the Seder. So everything could be legislated in one way or
Yeah,
another.
but once it becomes, okay, so it's true. So sometimes these laws were, okay, that's an interesting question. You open a little bit of a can of worms over there. Sometimes laws which are legislated were originally a custom. Sometimes you are correct, okay? But usually when we're defining over here, the rabbis would have said, this is what you should do Pesach. So the Pesach Seder is not in the Torah. The Pesach Torah, the night of the Pesach, of Pesach Seder, the Torah tells us to do three things. To eat the Korban Pesach with matzah and maror, but the herbs together with our families, and it has lots of laws about what we can do with the Paschal sacrifice, what we can't do, and it also tells us that we have to tell the story of the Exodus. That's all it says. So the rabbis made legislated customs or legislated a seder, what we should be doing. So a lot of it is legislated by the rabbis making a seder, an order to the night, and some things just become custom. So when it says custom, for example, the seder plate, that wasn't legislated. The rabbis never actually made that into a law. Hiding the afikomen, I think this is quite an easy one.
Customary.
Sorry?
Customary.
Yeah, you're correct. It's definitely only customary. A lot of people don't even do this. If some people don't do it, then you know for sure it's customary. Retelling the story of the Exodus.
We have to do from the Torah.
So it's the Torah. So if it would say received, it's clearly received. It's from the Torah. Very good. This is a really good understanding to see how all the categories come about. Passover said the four sons. Where is that from? The four sons.
Sounds like a custom.
Okay. Aval kineged arba banim dibra Torah. So it's derived. The Torah says four different times, four different ways about four different. Or you should tell your children, or when your child asks. And we have all these verses that teach us about four different children, and it's clearly in the Torah. But what type of children they are, that is the derived part. Okay, so it's a derived element of the Torah. Washing your hands before eating matzah, this you should know, because we've spoken about it. What is that?
Legislated.
Legislated, very good. It's a legislative law to wash. We always wash it for. Eating the matzah, you know this one. What is that one? Received. That's a biblical law. We have to eat matzah on Pesach, the most important one. The amount of matzah. The amount of matzah, this is a tricky one. There's actually an amount of matzah. We can't just have a small little piece. We actually have to have a whole kazayas. Which one is that?
Could that be legislated?
Okay, that's actually.
I think it's derived.
I'd say that it's actually received,
Derived.
believe it or not. It's
Oh,
actually
received.
from Moses in Mount Sinai. Received is not a received from the Torah, it's received as an oral tradition of Moses. That's why considered biblical. Okay, 100% biblical. Eating the Hillel sandwich, what would you say that one is? Also a bit of a tricky one. This is a legislated one because Hillel legislated that we should eat matzah and maror because of the whole confusion of how it is in the Torah, not so clear. So therefore he said that you should take it and eat them all together because of what it says in the verse over there, which can lead to this. Okay, this one, eating the egg on the Pesach Seder. Take a guess.
Custom.
You're correct. If anybody wants to go, you can go. I'm just having fun with this guy. I'm sorry. I think it's good lesson. The past, Elijah's cap.
Has to be a custom. You can,
correct.
Yeah,
It's a custom. It's kind of a Kabbalistic custom. Okay, that ends our discussion. You know what? I'm going to quickly, for those to do, there's a video which summarizes the last two lessons together. So I'll play that video for you if it works. Let's see if it works.
Lesson 3. 1. The Torah authorizes the sages to enact new ordinances, and God guides them to the proper conclusions. 2. Rabbinic enactments
Are you able to hear? Can you hear what's being said?
Just a bit
Yes.
louder if you could.
Yes? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I can't make it a bit louder now. Okay,
intended to fix societal problems, safeguard against biblical transgression, or promote religious observance. 3. Enactments issued by the sages must be presented as rabbinic laws, not as God-given instructions. 4. The sages may not pass an enactment unless they assess that the majority of the population can tolerate it, and if the population never accepted it, the law is void. 5. Customs initiated by the people to enhance religious observance reflect our deepest bond with God. 6. The categories of Torah that place greater emphasis on human initiative are crucial for fulfilling the ultimate purpose of creation. Next week, for
okay.
many, Talmud is synonymous with debate. Indeed, Jewish law abounds with disagreements and dissenting opinions. Does that mean Jewish law is just a matter of opinion? Furthermore, do the debates indicate that the system is not divine? How can there be multiple opinions in a God-given Torah? Is Talmudic debate unfortunate or ideal? Lastly, how is a final halacha determined in the event of different opinions? Join us next week for an intriguing discussion about this topic.
Okay, so hopefully we will do that unless we do a Purim topic. Otherwise, we will go into this course is created by a great organization called JLI. So that's why we have the great video over there. I don't have time to put such good PowerPoints together. I hope you realize that. But anyway, when I do get hold of some of the courses, they're great. Next week, either we'll do Purim or we'll go into 4, which is a very interesting understanding why there's debate and how the debate takes place, and also how we get to the final conclusions when we're trying to decode the Jewish traditions. Okay, I hope tonight was insightful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Really good. Very
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you very much. Yishar Koach.
Thank you. Good night.